now we've got to move on to when we get to the complicated politics. We have to read the next canto. So, upon my mind's reviving, it had closed on hearing the lament of those two kindred. Since sorrow had confounded me completely, I see new sufferings, new sufferers surrounding me on every side, wherever I move or turn about or set my eyes. The idea that they're two kindred, Paolo and Francesca, are members of the same family. They are brother-in-law and sister-in-law, right? So that adds another sort of nail in the argument that this was an innocent affair, right? It was also a kind of incest. They were members of the same family, not just strangers. So notice how Dante here uses the historical present. We talked about that last time. He shifts the tense into the present tense. I am in the third circle, filled with cold, unending, heavy, and accursed rain. Its measure and its kind are never changed. So what you find is in the part of hell that punishes sins of incontinence, so-called upper hell, we'll talk about that, the punishments tend to be things that we experience on earth, like wind and here rain and snow. They're sort of natural phenomenon that are unpleasant. But when you get into lower hell, the punishments become very bizarre, like people turning into serpents, like people being transformed into trees, things that are not natural at all. Gross hailstones, water gray with filth and snow, come streaking down across the shadowed air. The earth, as it receives that shower, stinks. So this is another thing you can, sort of monitor as you read through the Inferno, all of the different ways that Dante thinks of to make the Inferno an unpleasant place. It's both cold and hot. We've talked about that. It's windy. Now it smells, right? It's sort of every sense is offended by this horrible environment. Over the souls of those submerged beneath that mess is an outlandish, vicious beast, his three throats barking, dog-like, Cerberus. So now we get an additional irritating thing, noise, right? It's noisy as well as stinky and cold and hot and windy and raining and sleeting. It's noisy. And I don't know about you, but I think the dog's barking is the most irritating noise in the world. It's ruff, ruff, ruff. When we lived in Macau, we had an apartment, beautiful apartment, a top in the university compound, top penthouse apartment. Right next to us, about maybe 10, 20 feet, was another building with a penthouse apartment. It was inhabited by a Portuguese woman whose husband used to be a high official in the university. She had two dogs that she left on her terrace the whole time. I don't think she ever took them on a walk. I never saw them inside. They bark continuously, day and night, Absolutely intolerable. And Cerberus has got three throats. It's not just like one dog barking, it's like three of them barking, horrible. And this is part of the punishment here. Because later, remember, it says there, he stunned the spirits so that they wished that they were dead. Top of the next page, the noise is terrible. So in any case, Cerberus, of course, is another figure that Dante borrows from classical mythology, the dog guard of the underworld. Here, he's a kind of mascot. A mascot is a animal that symbolizes a team. A mascot of a football team might be a lion or, a bear. The Bears, the Chicago football team, their mascot is a big bear. It's a sort of symbolic animal. Well, in Dante's Inferno, frequently the guardians of a circle of hell or a section of hell are mascots in the sense that they not only kind of guard the circle, but they also symbolize the sin that is punished in that circle. So we'll find Phlegius, for example, who's the mascot or the guardian of the circle of the wrathful, is a very angry person. And Cerberus here is a very gluttonous person. This is the circle of gluttony. So they have to get past Cerberus, just like Virgil and Sibyl have to get past Cerberus in Book 6 of the Aeneid. In the Aeneid, Sibyl throws Cerberus a drugged cake. She's got some bread or cake, and she puts some kind of sleeping stuff. She throws it, he eats that, he falls asleep, and they manage to rush past him. Here, Virgil just takes a handful of earth, nothing special. This dog will eat anything. Throws it, Cerberus greedily eats it, and then they passed by safely. We walked across the shades, top of the next page, on whom there thuds that heavy ray, and set our souls upon their empty images that seemed like persons. And all those spirits lay upon the ground except for one, who sat erect as soon as he caught sight of us in front of him. So this is the usual procedure for a section of the Inferno, also for Purgatorio and Paradiso. There's a description of the general setting, then there's a description of the general situation of the souls in that part of the afterworld, and then one or two of the souls actually speaks to Dante, and we get a dialogue. So the general situation has been described, and the general situation of the sinners. We're still not absolutely certain of what the sin is in this canto until Chaco says the damning sin of gluttony. So again, it's kind of interesting to see if you could guess the sin before it's specifically mentioned, if you haven't read the canto summary at the beginning. So try reading some of the cantos without reading that first. So all those spirits lay upon the ground except for one, this is page 53, who sat erect as soon as he caught sight of us in front of him. "O you who are conducted through this hell," he said to me, "recall me if you can, for you, before I was unmade, were made." You got to stop and think about that. Before I was unmade, were made. It means you were born before I died. "And I to him, it is perhaps your anguish that snatches you out of my memory, so that it seems I have never seen you." So this is a motif that comes back too. The sins of these souls have so reduced their humanness that Dante doesn't recognize them. Virgil makes this explicit in the circle of the hoarders and the wasters, where Dante says, I think I should be able to recognize some of these souls. And Virgil says, no, their life has reduced them to such a state that you won't be able to see them as individual humans at all. "But tell me who you are, and you who are set in such a dismal place, such punishment, if other pains are more, none's more disgusting." So the gluttons are sort of, I don't know how you would explain it, they're in a garbage heap, sort of a combination of a garbage heap and a sewer. And so their entire lives were focused on eating, and then of course when you eat, you also excrete. And their life is it's pretty much a karmic relationship, the contrapasso here. So now there's a political discussion. We haven't had this before. This is an important theme of the entire comedy, and here we get it in some detail. "And he to me, your city, one so full of envy that its sack has always spilled, that city held me in the sunlit life. The name your citizens gave me was Chaco, and for the damning sin of gluttony, as you can see, I languish in the rain." Well, Chaco is the Florentine dialect word that means pig, but it's probably Giacomo. His name was Giacomo, and so they just tweaked a little bit and they got Chaco, because he was famous as a glutton. Gluttony comes from the igolosi, la gola, means the throat. So it's the sins of the throat, what goes down the throat. And of course, we think, well, gluttony, so you raid the refrigerator once in a while. Is that such a horrible sin? You also have to remember gluttony includes alcoholism, right? Alcoholism, and what a horrible, problem that causes in a lot of societies. Drug abuse, maybe. excess smoking? I don't know. Maybe Dante didn't know about these kinds of behaviors. It's interesting to think where he might put those. The name your citizens gave me was Chaco, and for the damning sin of gluttony, as you can see, I languish in the rain, and I, a wretched soul, am not alone, for all of these have this same penalty for this same sin. And he said nothing more. I answered him, Chaco, your suffering so weights on me that I am forced to weep. But tell me if you know what end awaits the citizens of that divided city. Florence is a divided city because of the political factionalism. Talk about it in a moment. What future waits for the citizens of that divided city? Is any just man there, meaning any man of integrity, any person of honesty? Tell me the reason why it has been assailed by so much schism, or schism. If you're British, you say schism. Means division. And he to me, after long controversy, they'll come to blood. The citizens will begin a bloody war. The party of the woods, because the Cherokee family had come from the countryside, that was the whites, Dante's party, the party of Dante's family. The party of the woods will chase the other out with much offense. But then within 3 suns they too must fall, at which the other party, the blacks, will prevail, using the power of one who tacks his sails. So Pope Boniface VIII was the one that brought the blacks back into power in Florence. We'll talk about that in a moment. The Italian says, che teste piaggia. Piaggia means to walk between the water and the shore, to walk right on the border. So it's a metaphor for an opportunist, right? You walk, you're not in the water and you're not on the shore, you walk right on the border, very carefully, guiding your action by what will bring you greatest profit, personal profit. No principles, right? This party, that is the blacks, will hold high its head for long and heap great weights upon its enemies. So this is a prophecy, right? This has not happened yet. And the prophecy of the great weights being heaped on the enemies of the blacks is a prophecy of Dante's exile, because he was a member of the white party. However much they weep indignantly, 2 men are just, but no one listens to them. 2 men. Well, some commentators say Dante and his friend Guido Cavalcante. Others say, no, it just means very few men. You know, like in Chinese, you can say 1 for very many, 10,000. Right? We were living in Xiamen, there was a park, Wan Shi Gongyuan. And my son asked me, are there really 10,000 rocks? And I said, no, just a lot of rocks. It just means a lot of rocks. So this may mean only very few men are just. No one listens to them. 3 sparks that set on fire every heart are envy, pride, and avariciousness. Now some commentators pick this up and they say, those 3 sins, that must be the 3 animals, right? They must correspond to the 3 animals. So that's another interpretation for the 3 animals that block Dante's path up the mountain. With this his words inciting tears were done, and I to him, I would learn more of you. I ask you the gift of further speech. To Gaio, Farinata, men so worthy, Arrigo, Mosca, Jacopo, Rusticucci, and all the rest whose minds were bent toward the good, do tell me where they are, and let me meet them, for my great longing drives me on to learn if heaven sweetens or hell poisons them. And they are among the blackest souls. A different sin has dragged them to the bottom. If you descend so low, there you can see them. So here's a big difference between Dante's view of the afterworld and Virgil's. For Virgil, if you perform great deeds of public service, you get into Elysium. For Dante, these were good politicians, right? They were honest. They were hardworking. They had private sins, right? Sort of like Bill Clinton, right? A fairly good president, but then with Monica Lewinsky, you don't know. It's something that's sort of unrelated to the larger picture, but from a Christian point of view, that is a failing that can put you in deep trouble. But when you have returned to the sweet world, I pray, recall me to men's memory. Now what you find is the deeper that Dante goes into the Inferno, the less willing the souls are to be remembered. Until when he gets to the bottom of the Inferno, he actually has to kind of start ripping the hair out of one of the souls to get him to admit who he is. They don't want to be remembered. They want to be forgotten. But in this part of hell, still wish to be recalled. I say no more to you and answer no more. Then his straight gaze grew twisted and awry. He looked at me a while, then bent his head and fell as low as all his blind companions. So the end of the canto, I won't read the whole thing. Dante asks the question of Virgil, if after the last judgment the torments of hell will be greater or less. And the answer is they'll be greater. Because Virgil says a human being is only perfect when the body and the soul are reunited. And something that is more perfect can either experience suffering or happiness in a greater capacity, has a greater capacity to experience either suffering or happiness. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the politics. You need to remember Dante's Inferno is not just an inventory of personal failings, but also a criticism of society. Remember, there's the Dante al suo poema. The city of Florence is a major subject of the poem. The earliest political conflict that's mentioned in the comedy is that between two political factions called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. I Guelfi, I Ghibellini, really strange names and hard to spell. They derived from two German families who were rivals for the imperial throne, the Welf and Weidlingen families. And so that comes into Italian as these strange Guelfi and Ghibellini. Roughly speaking, the differences between the two parties were this. The Guelphs were members of the lower aristocracy and the middle class. The Ghibellines, the higher aristocracy. The Guelphs' wealth and influence was based on business, on trade. They were the new representatives of mercantilism. And the Ghibellines were the old wealth based on ownership of land, the old feudal aristocracy. The Guelphs were supported by and supported the Pope as their leader. And the Ghibellines supported and were supported by the emperor in this long contest between the papacy and the empire. At the Battle of Monteperti, 1260, the Guelphs were defeated. The city of Florence would have been completely destroyed without the intervention of a general by the name of Farinata. Dante admires him and he meets him in the 10th canto of Inferno. Sort of a noble enemy. He's one of the enemies of Dante's party and family, and yet Dante admires him because he did save Florence from being razed to the ground, burnt to the ground. However, after the Battle of Benevento in 1266, Dante was only 1 year old, the Guelphs achieved total victory and became the ruling party of Florence. So the members of Dante's family were Guelphs, although not prominent in politics until Dante himself became prominent in politics. Before long, a new division broke out within the Guelph party itself. So there are really two opposing sets of factions here: the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and then you get the blacks and the whites. And I mean, this reminds me of playing football. We used to play football. Okay, you take your shirts off. You're the skins and we're the shirts, and you go out and play football. It's just totally arbitrary. The blacks and the whites. Human beings will divide themselves and begin fighting for no reason whatsoever. So the new division seems to have mirrored the old one. Traditionally, the commentators said the blacks were the old aristocracy and the whites were the new mercantile class. Recent research has suggested maybe they were both members of the old ruling class, simply competing for political power. One thing that's for sure is that the blacks were supported by and supported the Pope, and the whites were the imperial party. And so Dante, unfortunately for him, was a white. The cities of the 14th century were what we would call today failed states, incapable of ensuring order and securing the safety of their inhabitants. Because of the almost continual political instability, medieval Italian cities were built in such a way that houses were built in such a way that they could serve as fortresses. And when I was in Italy this last time, I went to the Museo di Dante, the Museum of Dante, which is actually just a house. They've just picked one, a fortress house, pretty much at random. They don't know that that was actually his house. But it's got some nice displays, and one of the displays is a diagram of a tower house. And I tried to take a picture of it, but there wasn't enough light, and it's blurry, so I can't show it to you. In any case, the caption, the description of the tower house, gave me this interesting piece of information that when the parties changed in a medieval town, the party that came to power had all of its opponents' tower houses lowered so that they weren't as high as the party that came to power, you know. And I could only think of Macau when we were there. Stanley Ho, you know, the king of Macau, he owns the main casinos there, did own the most important casinos before the Americans came in. He built this huge Macau tower. It's kind of like a tower with a revolving restaurant, see? And everybody, oh, Stanley Ho and everything. But then China came in, the Bank of China, and they built Bank of China building, you know. And so you can kind of see, oh, you know, China strikes back now. Who's more important, Stanley Ho or China? And so it's pretty much the same idea that, you know, they didn't allow any other of these towers to be taller than their towers. They had to be, actually, the tops had to be chopped off. So there's a tower house in Trento. That's where I studied briefly my Dante in Italy. And there's the Casa di Dante in Florence. Again, if you go there, don't believe that it's actually the house that he lived in. He lived in that part of Florence, in that kind of house. A few essential facts. Dante served as one of the priors of Florence for the White Party. And in the summer of 1300, he was on a mission to Rome when Pope Boniface VIII asked the brother of the French king, Charles of Valois, to pacify Florence. In other words, you know, the factionalism was getting out of control, so Boniface pretended that he wanted to help Florence by creating peace, but of course Boniface favored the Black Party, and so once Charles got there, city power was turned over to the black side. And Dante escaped arrest because he wasn't home. He was tried in absentia and sentenced to death for political corruption. He never returned to Florence, so this was the exile. There is Pope Boniface, Dante's great enemy. He comes back again and again throughout the comedy. Prophecy in the Inferno. We see this happening in Ciacco's speech to Dante. He's able to tell Dante what the future is. How does this happen? Because he's right, of course. He knows the future, right? So it happens because the imagined year, it's a really brilliant idea that Dante had. The imagined year of the journey is 1300, right? The millennium year. But the poem was written much later, right? It was only finished, the Inferno was only finished in 1314. So the difference between the imagined time and the actual time of writing allows these characters in hell to predict events that would take place in the years following 1300. For example, the victory of the blacks, Dante's exile, and so forth. So he gives the he gives the souls of his hell this strange power to be able to see the future. They can't see the present. We'll talk more about this. This comes up in the Canto where he talks to Farinata. Pluto, il gran nemico.